It wasn't a public argument. No cameras, no witnesses, just a quiet request inside a private royal sitting room, and a silence that reportedly lasted far longer than it should have. Meghan didn't ask for a title. She didn't ask for a role. She asked for a necklace, a single piece of jewelry locked away for decades. And according to insiders, the Queen's response wasn't refusal. It was something colder. Before we go further, supporting the channel with a like and subscribe means more stories like this can be told. The meeting had been scheduled as routine. Preparations were already underway for an upcoming royal appearance, one meant to project unity, continuity, and calm confidence. Advisors expected a discussion about wardrobe coordination, symbolism, and public messaging. Those meetings were usually brief. The monarch approved, suggested, or redirected, and the machinery moved forward. But this time, the conversation slowed. Meghan's request was delivered politely, without challenge. She had reportedly heard about a diamond necklace held within the private collection. Not one displayed in exhibitions, not one catalogued in public archives, but one mentioned quietly among staff, who spoke about royal jewels with careful language. She asked if it could be considered for the engagement. The reaction was immediate, though not spoken. Aides present later recalled a stillness that did not belong in ordinary royal protocol. The Queen did not respond with tradition or precedent. She did not offer an alternative. She simply remained silent long enough that the room itself seemed to shift around the request. Then came an instruction rarely heard in such meetings. Senior staff were asked to leave. Doors closed, conversations stopped outside. And inside, according to accounts passed quietly through palace corridors, the discussion changed from wardrobe planning to something far more personal. Harry, it was said, did not initially understand why the atmosphere had hardened. To him, jewels were ceremonial. Inherited objects rotated among family members depending on rank and occasion. But the Queen's stillness suggested this was not about rank at all. The necklace was not being evaluated. It was being guarded. Within hours, communication began moving through the palace in discreet channels. Dressers checked records that had not been reviewed in years. Archivists were asked to confirm storage classifications normally untouched during modern engagements. Long-serving staff members spoke cautiously, choosing words like restricted instead of rare. The message circulated without announcement. The piece was never to be offered. When the Queen finally spoke, witnesses described the tone not as angry nor dismissive, but deliberate. The refusal did not criticize Meghan, nor question her place. Instead, it framed the necklace as something belonging to a different category altogether. Not ceremonial, not decorative, but protected. The distinction mattered, even if its meaning remained unspoken. Those present left the room understanding that a line had been drawn long before the request had ever been made. And, for the first time, Meghan's interest in the collection revealed a deeper reality. Some royal heirlooms were not part of tradition. They were part of memory. But to understand why a simple request carried such weight, you have to understand what the necklace actually was, and why it had remained untouched for generations. The royal vault contains thousands of jewels, many priceless, many forgotten. But this one was different. Unlike the tiaras worn at coronations or the brooches seen at state banquets, this necklace had no official photographs, no exhibition record, and no loan history. Yet palace inventories listed it repeatedly, then sealed the description. A jewel recorded, but never shown. And the reason traces back to a royal crisis the public was never meant to connect. Long before modern headlines, the monarchy lived through a moment when inheritance itself felt uncertain. The crown was secure in name, but fragile in loyalty. Advisors feared division not from outside pressure, but from within bloodlines. During that period, a monarch reportedly commissioned a private piece, not for ceremony, not for display, but for reassurance. The necklace was assembled quietly using stones taken from older heirlooms, dismantled without announcement. Each diamond had belonged to a different branch of the family, fragments of alliances that once competed for influence. Bringing them together was meant to symbolize unity. Instead, it created something more complicated. No proclamation accompanied its completion. It never appeared at a coronation. It never marked a royal wedding. Even during moments when the palace used jewelry to send public messages of stability, this necklace remained absent. Over time, absence became its identity. Staff who catalogued regalia were instructed to record its existence but omit detail. Dressers learned to redirect questions if anyone asked about missing inventory numbers. The jewel was preserved not by ceremony, but by silence. Its storage reflected the same caution. The necklace was placed in a compartment separated from the working collection, a section opened only under the monarch's direct authority. Access required confirmation beyond normal procedure, and generations of attendants were trained to treat it as a restricted object rather than a wearable possession. Among senior royals, knowledge of it existed like a half-remembered story, acknowledged quietly, never explored openly. Because the necklace carried a memory, the unity it symbolized had not lasted. Shortly after its creation, the monarchy entered a private conflict that threatened its internal order. Alignments shifted. Trust fractured. What had been intended as a bridge between factions became associated with the moment those factions hardened. The diamonds themselves were never blamed, yet they became inseparable from the emotional weight of that period. Over decades, the family stopped referring to it as valuable. They referred to it as sensitive. By the time Elizabeth inherited the role, the necklace had already become an inheritance of responsibility rather than beauty. She did not destroy it. She did not display it. She preserved it exactly where it had been placed, treating it less like regalia and more like a sealed document. Something history required to exist, but wisdom required to remain untouched. So when Meghan's request reached her, the Queen was not evaluating a modern situation. She was confronting an echo. To the outside world, it was a diamond necklace. To the institution, it was a symbol that once blurred lines between belonging and influence, between family and authority. And once Meghan learned this was no ordinary jewel, the request changed. It was no longer about wearing it. It was about why she couldn't. At first, Meghan reportedly thought the refusal was tradition, just another unwritten royal rule. But the explanations kept changing. One aide said timing, another said protocol. Then came a private warning. Some royal items are not denied. They are protected. What started as curiosity began to feel like exclusion. And insiders say this was the first moment she realized she wasn't being kept out of the system. She was being kept away from something specific. She did not challenge the answer publicly. Instead, she tried to understand it quietly, the way newcomers to the institution were expected to. Messages were sent through intermediaries rather than direct requests. A dresser was asked whether alternative access might exist for future engagements. A private secretary was approached to clarify if restrictions changed depending on occasion. Each response sounded polite, reassuring even, yet none addressed the same question twice. The words shifted while the meaning remained fixed. Not available. Soon alternatives appeared. Brooches of equal value, necklaces with recognized history, pieces that had passed through generations and carried no controversy. The offers were generous enough that declining them felt almost inappropriate, yet they deepened the mystery. The palace was not refusing jewelry. It was refusing that jewelry. The Queen's involvement then became unmistakable. Instructions no longer filtered through assistants. They came directly from her office, delivered without emphasis, yet impossible to reinterpret. The necklace was not to be discussed further. No exception. No review. The matter closed. Harry reportedly struggled with the firmness of the decision. He had grown up around objects rotated according to rank and ceremony, not sealed permanently from family members. His confusion wasn't about entitlement, it was about intensity. Why did this single heirloom provoke a response stronger than protocol itself? And why had no one ever explained its meaning to him? Meghan began quietly examining past assignments. She asked which pieces had been lent to new brides, which were reserved for senior women, which had once been controversial but later normalized. The pattern she expected never appeared. There was simply a blank space, a category of one. Staff grew careful. Conversations shortened. Even longtime attendants, usually relaxed around such topics, began choosing neutral phrases that avoided the necklace entirely. One senior courtier eventually offered advice not as instruction but as warning. Let this one go. The tone suggested less etiquette than experience, as though persistence might reopen something better left undisturbed. For Meghan, the message landed differently. The refusal now carried emotion. Not rejection of her, but withholding of truth. Within the couple, the subject surfaced quietly. Questions replaced assumptions. If the institution valued openness, why protect an object from its own members? Harry defended tradition. Meghan questioned silence. Neither argued loudly, yet the uncertainty lingered between them, subtle but persistent. Because the necklace was no longer about appearance, it had become a question of trust, what the family shared, what it concealed, and who was allowed to understand why. But the palace reaction made one thing clear. This wasn't about Meghan's position. It was about the necklace's past, and who it had once belonged to. Long before Meghan entered the royal family, another woman allegedly asked about the same necklace, and received the same answer. But her story didn't end quietly. According to palace historians, the last royal who pursued the jewel became entangled in a scandal that shook the monarchy's stability. Since then, the necklace wasn't just stored, it was guarded. Not as treasure, as a warning. Her name was rarely spoken in connection with the piece, yet among senior courtiers the association was understood. She had entered the family at a time when public expectations were shifting, and internal loyalties were fragile. Officially, she held position through marriage, but privately, she sought relevance beyond ceremony. The necklace, she believed, offered that pathway. Not because of its beauty, but because of what it implied. Certain heirlooms did not signal rank. They signaled proximity to the monarch's trust. The first time she wore it was not at an event, nor before crowds. It was during a private gathering where influence mattered more than appearances. Accounts later suggested conversations changed that evening. People listened differently. Decisions previously guided by senior advisors subtly moved in new directions. The necklace seemed to mark authority that had never been publicly granted. Soon, tensions surfaced. Family members questioned who had approved the access. Advisors debated whether symbolism had overstepped hierarchy. The monarchy relied on visible order, yet here was a message delivered silently through diamonds. One that blurred lines between official roles and private persuasion. What the public never saw was the quiet repositioning inside palace walls, where relationships hardened and trust narrowed. When the matter reached the Queen, then still preparing to inherit responsibility, the reaction was decisive. The necklace was removed from circulation immediately. No reprimand issued, no statement released, but access was revoked permanently. From that moment, the piece ceased to be an heirloom and became a caution. The institution had learned something uncomfortable. Objects could alter perception faster than titles. Archivists later categorized it under a term rarely used in royal documentation: sensitive regalia. Not lost, not retired, but protected. Its file included notes about context rather than craftsmanship. Future dressers were instructed never to suggest it, never to acknowledge it unless directly commanded by the monarch. The purpose was not secrecy for mystery's sake, but prevention. The past would not repeat through oversight. Inheritance tensions of that era faded publicly, yet internally they left marks. The necklace came to represent the moment influence slipped beyond intended boundaries. For decades afterward, senior family members recognized it not as valuable, but volatile. A jewel capable of reshaping perception could destabilize carefully balanced relationships. So the rule hardened across generations. It would exist, but it would not return to use. The monarchy would never again allow symbolism to outrun structure. Diamonds could dazzle the world, but within the palace, they could also rewrite hierarchy, and that risk outweighed any tradition of sharing. When Meghan asked about the necklace, she stepped unknowingly into that memory. The refusal she received was not formed in the present, but inherited from a decision made long before her arrival. What she encountered was not resistance to her, it was resistance to repetition. And when fragments of the story reached her, the meaning shifted. The restriction no longer felt abstract. It felt deliberate, shaped by a past she had never been told, yet was now expected to respect. When Meghan discovered the story, insiders say she didn't withdraw. She pushed harder. There are refusals in the royal family, and then there are decisions. The Queen eventually gave one, clearly, formally, and personally. The necklace would not be unlocked. Not now, not later, not ever. No explanation added. For those present, it felt less like denying jewelry and more like closing a door that had once caused the crown irreversible damage. The meeting was arranged with unusual care. Not ceremonial, not routine. A private conversation where tone mattered more than wording. By then, the earlier uncertainty had faded. This was no longer a misunderstanding about protocol or timing. It was a matter brought directly to the monarch, and the monarch chose clarity. The Queen spoke without hesitation. There would be no reconsideration, no seasonal review, no exception for significance or occasion. The necklace would remain where it had been placed decades earlier. Her voice reportedly carried neither anger nor apology, only certainty, the kind that does not invite negotiation. Meghan listened, composed but visibly affected. She had spent weeks navigating explanations that shifted depending on who delivered them. Now there was finally one answer, and its simplicity carried more weight than any justification. The absence of reasoning felt deliberate. To explain would have meant reopening history. To refuse without explanation preserved it. Harry tried to soften the outcome, not by challenging the decision but by searching for middle ground. Perhaps a future reconsideration. Perhaps a conversation later. The response did not change. The Queen's position remained steady, anchored in something beyond present circumstances. For the first time, he found himself unable to bridge two perspectives he believed could coexist. Senior aides quietly accepted the finality. Among them, relief moved subtly through the corridors. The uncertainty surrounding the request had required careful navigation. Now the matter was settled. Palace operations could return to routine, yet the atmosphere had shifted. Everyone understood a precedent had been reinforced. Certain objects were not governed by tradition, but by memory, and memory did not yield to modern expectation. Within the couple, The moment lingered. Meghan did not argue publicly, yet privately the refusal felt personal, despite the careful neutrality of its delivery. She saw a symbol withheld, not because of rank, but because of perceived risk. The palace, however, framed the same moment differently. It was not about denying her place, it was about preserving structure that predated both of them. The contrast created quiet tension. Each side believed it was protecting something vital. One protecting openness, the other protecting continuity. The necklace became the point where those values collided, not loudly, but persistently. Conversations grew more cautious. Trust adjusted in small ways, neither immediately recognized, but both eventually felt. What had begun as curiosity ended as a boundary. Not shouted, not explained, simply established. But the real consequence wasn't the necklace. It was what the refusal represented. Royal jewels are never just decoration. Every stone carries hierarchy. Every assignment signals rank. In palace tradition, what you're allowed to wear tells the world who you truly are inside the monarchy. And this necklace, historians suggest, represented something far beyond prestige. It represented access to influence that even senior royals never fully held. Within the institution, clothing speaks carefully, but jewelry speaks absolutely. A brooch may acknowledge respect. A tiara may confirm position. Yet certain pieces were understood to carry meaning beyond ceremony. They indicated proximity, not to the throne's image, but to the throne's decisions. The necklace belonged to that category. Its history had taught the palace a lesson. Power did not always arrive through titles. Sometimes it appeared through perception. Generations earlier, those who saw it worn interpreted it as permission to listen differently. The wearer was no longer simply part of the family. She was perceived as part of council. Conversations shifted subtly around her. Opinions held greater weight, even when unspoken. The monarchy, built on structure, recognized how fragile that perception could be. Authority must be defined, not assumed. So the necklace was removed from use. Not because it lacked beauty, but because it carried implication. Allowing it back into circulation risked suggesting an advisory role outside established channels. The Queen understood that symbolism often outruns explanation. Once the public saw it, commentary would follow. Who approved it? What did it signal? Why her? The questions themselves could reshape relationships. The palace relied on remaining stable. Meghan's request, therefore, touched more than tradition. It brushed against a boundary that was never written but always enforced. From the palace perspective, granting access would not have elevated her. It would have altered perception of authority within the family. Modern audiences might have seen fashion. Observers inside royal circles would have seen endorsement. The Queen's refusal preserved a division the monarchy historically maintained: those who represent and those who advise. Some royals stood before cameras, embodying continuity. Others worked closer to decision-making, rarely announced yet deeply influential. The necklace once blurred that separation. The institution would not allow ambiguity again. Even privately, concerns extended beyond family dynamics. If the necklace appeared publicly, media speculation could spiral into interpretation. Analysts might read it as a shift in internal power. Commentators could construct narratives the palace could neither confirm nor deny without amplifying them. Silence, the monarchy's most reliable defense, would become impossible. So the denial became a protective measure, not against a person, but against reinterpretation. The Queen prevented a modern moment from rewriting an old lesson learned at cost. By keeping the necklace sealed, she kept the hierarchy intact. Visible roles remained visible. Unseen influence remained unseen. To Meghan, The refusal felt like exclusion from understanding. To the institution, it was preservation of order. Both perceptions existed simultaneously, neither entirely dismissing the other, yet neither resolving the tension between transparency and tradition. And in that tension, the necklace's meaning sharpened. It was no longer simply a relic from the past. It was an active boundary, quietly reinforcing how power moved inside the monarchy. Not loudly, not publicly, but unmistakably to those who understood its language. By now, the story had quietly spread within royal circles, and reactions were not uniform. Inside the palace, news travels without being spoken. The refusal wasn't announced, yet everyone seemed to know. Some supported the Queen's caution. Others believed the decision widened an already fragile divide. And for the first time, the necklace became less about history and more about the monarchy's future. No memorandum circulated. No official briefing took place. Yet conversations shifted almost overnight. Invitations were worded more carefully. Casual remarks shortened when certain names entered the room. The request, and more importantly, the denial, moved quietly through the family like a current beneath still water. Everyone understood something significant had happened, even if no one repeated it aloud. Among senior royals, opinions separated along instinct rather than hierarchy. Those shaped by decades of tradition viewed the decision as inevitable. They saw not a rejection but a containment, a necessary reaffirmation that certain symbols belonged to the institution before any individual. To them, the Queen had protected continuity. The necklace represented a lesson already learned once at great cost, and the monarchy could not afford to relearn it. Others, especially the younger generation, interpreted the moment differently. They understood the logic, but questioned the silence surrounding it. If the institution expected trust, why preserve mysteries that created distance? Sympathy grew quietly, not rebellious, but reflective. They recognized the discomfort of being measured by rules that were never fully explained. Private family gatherings grew more careful. Topics once discussed openly now carried pauses. A simple reference to historical tradition could carry unintended weight. No argument erupted, yet tension settled into the atmosphere. The necklace, though unseen, began influencing conversations far beyond its existence. Advisors observed the shift with concern, not because of the jewel itself, but because symbols shape narratives. They warned that the longer its meaning remained unspoken, the more interpretations would fill the silence. Some believed clarifying the past could ease the strain. Others insisted explanation would amplify curiosity and weaken the protective barrier the Queen had reinforced. For Meghan, the outcome gradually defined her position more than any formal role ever could. Boundaries became clearer, not publicly imposed, yet unmistakably present. Invitations, responsibilities, and expectations aligned around invisible lines she could sense, but not always trace. The necklace had become shorthand within palace thinking, a reminder that belonging did not always include understanding. Harry felt the divide most personally. Loyalty pulled in two directions, toward the family that raised him and toward the partner navigating it for the first time. He did not challenge the monarchy, yet he could not dismiss the questions it created. The silence asked him to accept history without sharing it, and the weight of that balance lingered. Gradually, the jewel transformed into metaphor. Courtiers referenced it indirectly when discussing precedent. Younger members used it to describe the limits of adaptation. The monarchy itself began adjusting quietly, clarifying certain roles while preserving others, attempting to prevent future misunderstandings without reopening old wounds. Nothing was announced, yet behavior changed. Not dramatically, but enough that observers sensed evolution taking place beneath continuity. The necklace, never worn, still influenced decisions, shaping how the institution navigated modern expectations without surrendering inherited caution. Years later, the necklace still hasn't been worn, and that may be exactly the point. Today, the necklace remains where it has always been, untouched, unseen, and still restricted. But its story didn't end with refusal. It reshaped relationships, exposed invisible rules, and revealed how the monarchy protects itself. Not from scandal, but from symbolism. Time moved forward, yet the decision never softened. After the Queen's lifetime, many expected quiet reassessment. Traditions often evolve once responsibility passes to the next generation. But this object remained different. No announcement marked its status. No ceremonial redistribution acknowledged its existence. It simply stayed sealed, as though the instruction attached to it outlived the monarch who enforced it. No successor claimed it. No family member was designated future bearer. In a collection built on inheritance, that absence carried meaning of its own. The necklace belonged to no individual because its purpose was no longer personal. It had become institutional, a reminder preserved rather than a possession transferred. Within palace records, archivists maintained its classification unchanged, restricted, not damaged, not missing, not retired, restricted. The term appeared repeatedly across decades, surviving administrative revisions and catalog reorganizations. Each generation of staff learned the same practice: acknowledge it exists, offer no elaboration. The consistency itself became tradition. Outside official circles, historians debated its fate. Some believed it would eventually be displayed once distance dulled its implications. Others argued its power depended entirely on absence. To show it would dissolve its meaning. The mystery, they suggested, had become the message. The monarchy's quiet way of acknowledging that not all history benefits from exposure. Rule had existed silently, because no one rule had existed silently, because no one questioned it closely enough to notice. By asking, she illuminated the edge between inclusion and inheritance, between participation and understanding. The monarchy adapted after that moment, defining certain expectations more clearly while leaving others deliberately unspoken. The refusal preserved continuity, yet it also left distance. Both realities coexisted. Tradition held firm, but relationships adjusted around it. What could not be granted shaped conversations long after what could be granted had been forgotten. Over time, the necklace became less an object than a reference point. Courtiers invoked it carefully when discussing precedent. Commentators referenced it when exploring the limits of modernization. Within the family, its meaning settled into quiet acceptance, not resolved, not reopened, simply acknowledged as part of the structure everyone navigated. And that is where its influence rests. Not in brilliance, not in ceremony, but in restraint. The jewel guards nothing physical now. It guards interpretation. As long as it remains unseen, it cannot redefine roles, cannot provoke questions the institution cannot answer without consequence. Its strength lies in remaining hypothetical, powerful precisely because imagination fills the space where explanation never arrived. The monarchy learned long ago that symbols can destabilize faster than actions. This time, they chose prevention over correction. Because sometimes the crown's greatest authority isn't in what it shows the world, but in what it chooses to keep hidden forever.